Life stories, a young black man, a wrongful arrest, and a verdict that changed everything. Detective Eliza Benton was late, again. As she slid her motorcycle into a spot outside the Spokane County Courthouse, the clock on her display flashed 8:50 a.m., 10 minutes to go. Her stomach twisted, not from the time, but from the weight of what lay ahead. Today wasn't just any court day. It was the beginning of a case that could shift how profiling was handled across all of Washington state. She yanked off her helmet, ran a hand through her short curls, and squared her shoulders. Eliza was no stranger to pressure. As a seasoned black detective in a predominantly white precinct, she'd had to fight twice as hard for half the recognition. But today hit different. Today was personal. The defendant, a 22-year-old named Marcus Hill, arrested on his own front porch, no warrant, no probable cause. The reason? He looked like someone who'd been reported near the area a day earlier. The arresting officer? White. Rookie. Full of bravado. Eliza had read the arrest report 3 times and still couldn't make sense of it. It was textbook profiling. She cut through the side alley towards the courthouse's staff entrance, deliberately avoiding the crowded front steps swarmed with local and national media. They were waiting. Cameras out, mics up, headlines half-written. She didn't have the patience for that. Rounding the corner, she spotted a lone officer stationed at the side door. White, early 20s, rigid stance. He clocked her immediately and tensed. Eliza kept walking, pulling her badge from around her neck as she approached. Before she could speak, the officer raised his hand. "Ma'am, I need to see some ID." Eliza blinked. "I'm Detective Benton," she said, holding up the badge. "I'm the lead investigator on the Hill case." But the officer didn't even glance at it. His eyes traveled slowly down her face, to her jacket, her boots. He frowned. "There was an incident reported nearby. You matched the description." There it was, the phrase she'd heard more times than she could count. Match the description. "I'm going to need you to step aside and answer a few questions," he continued, one hand drifting casually near his belt. Eliza held his gaze, jaw tightening. "Officer, I am due in court in 8 minutes. I suggest you look at my badge again before making a bigger mistake." But he didn't move. "I don't care what you say you are. You're not going in there until I clear this." Her pulse surged. She'd dealt with racism her whole life, but to be profiled at the courthouse doors on the very day she was trying to expose this exact problem was suffocating. Just as the air between them thickened, a voice rang out.
"Hey, what the hell's going on?" Both turned to see Sergeant Darnell Rivers jogging up, mid-50s, black, and visibly displeased. His eyes widened when he saw Eliza. "Detective Benton?" "Yes," she replied tersely. Rivers turned on the younger officer. "You know who this is?" "She matched the description," the rookie muttered. "She's our lead detective," Rivers snapped. "You want to get yourself sued and fired in the same week?" The rookie's jaw clenched, but he stepped back, barely. "You all right?" Rivers asked Eliza, softer now. "I'm fine," though her fists were clenched inside her coat pockets. Without another word, she brushed past them both and entered the courthouse. Inside, the familiar, sterile air of the courthouse greeted her, but it felt different today. As she walked through the halls, the incident played on repeat in her head. The look in the rookie's eyes, the dismissiveness, the disbelief. It wasn't new, but it was exhausting. In courtroom 3C, the proceedings began. The gallery was full. Reporters, legal observers, activists. Eliza took her place beside the prosecution team and watched as Marcus Hill was brought in, cuffed, expression unreadable. When the trial kicked off, the prosecution laid the groundwork. An unjustified stop. No search warrant, no arrest warrant, no crime. Then Marcus took the stand. His voice was even, but his words were raw. He'd been standing on his own porch, waiting for his sister to bring in the house key. A police cruiser rolled by once, then again, then a third time before 2 officers jumped out and surrounded him. He hadn't moved, hadn't spoken. Still, they'd pulled their weapons. "They told me I looked nervous," Marcus said quietly. "I was just cold. It was raining. I had my hands in my pockets." Eliza watched the jury. Some leaned forward. Some scribbled notes. But a few had that blank, unreadable look, the look of people deciding whether they believed him. Halfway through his testimony, the courtroom doors opened. Eliza's heart sank. It was the rookie.
Same crisp uniform,
same squared jaw. Only now he looked smaller. His face was pale, his posture unsure. He slid into the witness box. The prosecutor stood. "We'd like to call Officer Trevor Grayson." Eliza hadn't even caught his name earlier. Trevor sat stiffly, his eyes flicking once to Eliza and then quickly away. "Officer Grayson," the prosecutor began, "describe the moment you and your partner approached Mr. Hill." Grayson cleared his throat. "We were on routine patrol. The suspect, Mr. Hill, matched a general description from a call we received." "What was that description?" Black male? Hoodie? Jeans? Do you know how many people in Spokane fit that description on a given day, officer?" Grayson fumbled. "It was the location, too. He looked out of place." There it was again. Eliza's hands tightened in her lap. "Out of place?" the prosecutor repeated, eyebrows raised. "What does that mean?" "He kept looking around, like he was checking if someone was watching." "Or maybe," the prosecutor said, "he was waiting for someone to bring him a house key, because that's what the records show, and no burglary was reported. No weapons were found, no illegal substances. You arrested him anyway?" Grayson hesitated. "We thought he might be involved in something. It was a judgment call." "A bad one," the prosecutor shot back. The silence in the courtroom was electric. Grayson shrank visibly. Eliza sat frozen, heart pounding. She had to stay neutral. She had to appear composed. But inside, her rage simmered. This man, this boy, had looked at her and Marcus and seen a threat. Not a detective, not a neighbor, a threat. The rest of his testimony unraveled from there. Each sentence poked new holes in the narrative. The jury noticed. After court recessed, Eliza stood outside, staring at the rainy street. Her phone buzzed. A message from Rivers. "You good?" She typed back one word. "Fine." But she wasn't. Not really. She stared up at the gray clouds rolling in over Spokane, wondering how many more stories like Marcus Hill's it would take before something truly changed. The next morning, a heavy fog blanketed the streets of Spokane. The courthouse stood like a fortress against the gray, cold light of dawn. Detective Eliza Benton stood by the courthouse window, sipping lukewarm coffee. Her reflection in the glass looked worn, sleep-deprived, but focused. Last night, she barely slept. She couldn't stop replaying the moment Officer Grayson had taken the stand. The tremble in his voice, the avoidance in his eyes. It wasn't guilt, not quite. It was fear, not of what he'd done, but of being seen doing it. The trial resumed promptly at 9 a.m. By then, the courtroom was even more packed than the day before. Local news had gone national overnight. Social media was ablaze. A video clip of Marcus's testimony had gone viral. Activists flooded the courthouse steps. Hashtags trended. And now everyone, from Spokane to D.C., was watching. Eliza took her seat in the front row of the gallery. This morning's witness? The woman who had called in the suspicious person report. Her name was Claire Atwood. White, early 40s, lived 2 houses down from Marcus Hill. She sat nervously at the witness stand, twisting her wedding ring. The prosecutor, Martin Delgado, began gently. "Miss Atwood, you made a 911 call the night of the incident, correct?" "Yes," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "What prompted the call?" "I saw someone standing on a porch 2 doors down. I didn't recognize him. He was wearing a hoodie. It was dark. I didn't know if he belonged there." Martin nodded slowly, letting the weight of her words settle. "Did he do anything threatening?" "No." "Did he attempt to enter the home?" "No." "Did he approach anyone?" "No." "So, to clarify," said Martin, taking a step closer, "you called 911 on a man standing still, on a porch, doing absolutely nothing?" Claire hesitated. "It wasn't like that. Something felt off." "Because he was black?" Claire flinched. "No, I didn't say that." But that's what you felt, wasn't it? Her mouth opened, then shut. No words came out. Martin let the silence linger before moving on. Do you now know who Marcus Hill is? Yes, she murmured. He lives there. He's your neighbor. Yes. Martin took a deep breath. Do you regret making that call? Claire looked out of the courtroom. Her eyes met Marcus's. Yes, she whispered. I do. The courtroom was still. For a moment, the only sound was the distant clicking of a journalist's keyboard. When court recessed for lunch, Eliza slipped outside into the crisp air. The reporters tried to approach, but she waved them off and walked down the sidewalk toward the park across the street. She needed a second to breathe. As she leaned against a tree, someone approached quietly. Detective Benton. She turned. Sergeant Darnell Rivers. You holding up? He asked. Trying. Rivers looked out at the street. Protesters had gathered in small clusters, holding signs. Some had Marcus's face on them. Others held messages like, "End profiling now," and "We are not suspicious." This case, Rivers said slowly, it's stirring up stuff. It should, Eliza replied. He nodded. Yeah. But it's also getting real personal. She glanced at him. It's always been personal, Sarge. You know that. Rivers gave her a look, not defensive, not hostile, just tired. You think I don't get that? I've been in this department 27 years, Ben, and I've seen both sides of the coin. I've been the kid being followed in a store, and I've been the officer who gets called an Uncle Tom because I'm wearing a badge. Eliza didn't respond. Listen, Grayson's not evil, but he's blind. Raised in a certain world, fed a certain narrative. This is the first time he's ever had to actually see what his actions mean.
And I'm supposed to feel sorry for him? Eliza snapped. No, just understand that if we don't start correcting it from both ends, the system and the people inside it, nothing's ever going to change. Eliza looked away. Understanding doesn't make it any less exhausting. I know, Rivers said softly, but you still show up. She didn't have an answer for that. Back in the courtroom, the next witness was called, Marcus Hill's younger sister, Tasha, 19 years old, soft-spoken, wore her emotions on her sleeve. She took the stand, nervously glancing around the room. Martin approached gently. Tasha, can you tell us what you saw that night? She nodded. I was coming home from my part-time job. I saw the lights first, blue and red, flashing in front of our house. I ran. Why did you run? Because I knew something was wrong. Marcus was waiting for me to bring the key. He told me he'd be on the porch. Her voice cracked. When I got there, he was face down on the concrete and handcuffs. One of the officers had a knee in his back. He was crying. I'd never seen him cry before. The gallery was silent. The jury looked on, eyes wide. Martin gave her a moment, then continued. Did he resist? No. Did he speak? He kept saying, "This is my house. I live here. My sister's coming." Over and over. Eliza stared at the girl's trembling hands, at the way she clutched the edge of the witness stand like it was the only thing keeping her upright. What happened next? They searched him, asked him all these questions. I told them who he was, that we lived there. They didn't believe me. Not until my mom came outside and started shouting. Then suddenly, everything changed.
No. Did they explain why he was being arrested? They said he was acting suspicious, that he matched a description. Tasha wiped at her cheeks, but he was just standing there, waiting for me, that's all. The tension in the room was unbearable. When the prosecutor ended his questioning, the defense attorney barely spoke. No cross, no questions, just a quiet, no further inquiry. Outside, the sky was beginning to clear. Eliza stood near the exit doors, watching the light push through the clouds. A metaphor, maybe,
or just a weather pattern? Rivers approached again. "You hear the whispers?" he asked. "About what?" "Grayson might take the stand again, voluntarily." Eliza raised an eyebrow. "Why?" "Word is he's feeling the pressure. Might want to clear the air." She scoffed. "Or save his reputation." Rivers shrugged. "People do the right thing for all kinds of reasons. Doesn't mean it's not the right thing." "I'll believe it when I see it." Rivers nodded slowly. "Fair enough." Eliza looked up at the sky again. "If Grayson did testify, if he came clean, it could tip the entire case, but it wouldn't fix the damage already done. Nothing could. Still, maybe, just maybe, it would be one step forward." The courtroom was packed again the next morning. Word had gotten out. Officer Trevor Grayson would be testifying, not as a hostile witness, not under subpoena, voluntarily. Eliza Benton sat on the prosecution's side, hands folded tightly in her lap. She could feel the electricity in the air, the tension crackling like static before a storm. Even the jury seemed more alert, sitting straighter in their seats.
Room, avoiding Eliza's gaze. He looked smaller than before, like someone who had been hollowed out and was just now realizing it. The judge called for order. Martin Delgado stood. "Your Honor, the prosecution calls Officer Trevor Grayson to the stand, at his request." There was a rustle in the gallery, reporters scribbling notes. Grayson took the stand and adjusted the microphone. His hands were visibly shaking. Martin approached slowly. "Officer Grayson, you understand you're testifying under oath?" "Yes," Grayson said quietly. "You requested this testimony?" "Yes," Grayson nodded. Martin gave him a moment. "Tell us why you're here." Grayson exhaled, looking down at his hands. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," he began, "about what happened that night, about what I did, what I assumed." His voice was brittle, like it might snap at any moment. "I didn't know Marcus Hill. I didn't recognize him. And instead of asking questions, instead of approaching calmly, I reacted. Because of the call, because of where he was standing, because of how he looked." He looked up briefly, directly at Eliza, then back to the jury. "I didn't see a neighbor. I didn't see a man waiting on his porch. I saw a threat. And I never stopped to ask myself, why?" Eliza's chest felt tight. "I thought I was protecting people, but the truth is, I didn't see Marcus as someone who needed protecting. I saw him as the problem. And that's on me." Martin let the silence breathe for a moment. "Officer Grayson, was there anything Marcus Hill did that night that suggested criminal behavior?" "No." "Did he resist?" "No." "Did he threaten you or your partner?" "No."
"No." Martin stepped closer. "So why did you arrest him?" Grayson paused. The courtroom was absolutely still. "Because I was afraid," he said finally. "And because I've been trained, by the job, by the culture, by the world I grew up in, to associate that fear with someone who looks like him." A quiet gasp rippled through the gallery. Eliza didn't move, didn't breathe. Grayson's voice cracked now. "I didn't mean to hurt anyone, but I did. And I need to take responsibility for that." Martin nodded, stepping back. No further questions. The defense lawyer stood briefly. "No questions, Your Honor." The judge dismissed Grayson. As he stepped down, he turned once toward Marcus, who stared at him with a mixture of disbelief and grief, and then walked quickly out the side door. The courtroom remained silent for a long moment. Then the judge spoke. "We'll resume with closing arguments this afternoon." Outside, Eliza didn't join the media swarm or the crowd of protesters. She stood beneath the overhang of the courthouse steps, watching the city shift around her. Sergeant Rivers found her there.
"You hear it?" he asked. "The silence?" She replied, "No, the shift. It's small, but it's real." Eliza gave a faint smile. "Don't get poetic on me, Sarge." He shrugged. "It's what old men do when they start to see cracks in the walls they've been banging on for decades." She glanced sideways at him. "You think what Grayson did mattered? I think it'll matter to the next rookie who's watching, or to the juror who needed to hear that, or maybe even to Marcus." She didn't reply, because she wasn't sure. She wanted to believe it, but belief took more energy than she had today.
Later that afternoon, the courtroom filled for closing arguments. The defense attorney, Gregory Vale, went first. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he began, "this case is about perspective, about fear, about the split-second decisions officers are forced to make. Was it a mistake? Maybe. But it wasn't malicious. It wasn't a hate crime. It was a human error in a high-pressure situation." He turned toward Marcus. "My client, Officer Grayson, has shown remorse. He's admitted fault. He's doing the hard work of understanding the biases he wasn't even aware of." Eliza felt her jaw clench. This is not the time to make an example out of a young man trying to do better. This is not the case to change the system. Don't sacrifice one life to symbolically repair another. He stepped back. Then Martin Delgado stood. He didn't rush. He let the silence settle first. "This case isn't about perspective," he said quietly. "It's about assumptions. It's about a man who was arrested on his own front porch for nothing more than being a black man in a hoodie." He turned to the jury. "You've heard it all. The call, the confrontation, the apology. But don't mistake an apology for justice. Officer Grayson's remorse is important, but it doesn't erase what he did or what Marcus went through." Martin's voice sharpened. "This isn't about ruining a young officer's career. It's about accountability. Because if we don't hold people accountable, especially those in power, then nothing changes. And if nothing changes, this will keep happening, again and again." He let his eyes rest on each juror. "This is your moment to say, 'We see it. We won't ignore it. Not this time.'" Then he turned and sat down. The judge gave instructions, and the jury was dismissed to deliberate. Hours passed. Night fell.
Eliza didn't leave. She sat in the hallway outside the courtroom, staring at the vending machine as if it held answers. Marcus sat a few chairs down, his lawyer beside him. He was quiet, withdrawn, like all his energy had finally run out. After a while, he turned toward her. "Do you think they'll do the right thing?" he asked. Eliza didn't respond at first. Then she looked over. "I think they might." He nodded. "That's something, I guess." "It is." They sat in silence for a while, two strangers tied together by a system they were both trying to survive. Then the door opened. The clerk stepped out. "The jury's ready." Eliza's stomach turned. She stood slowly, smoothing her blazer, her breath shallow. This was the moment. Everything they'd endured, the testimony, the headlines, the pain, it all led here. She followed the others into the courtroom. The courtroom lights buzzed faintly overhead. Every seat was filled. Reporters in the gallery sat rigid, pens ready. Protesters clustered outside the windows, silent behind glass. Eliza Benton stood just inside the double doors, arms crossed, gaze steady. Her heart beat hard against her ribs, but her face gave away nothing. The judge returned to the bench. "Bring in the jury," she said. The bailiff nodded and exited. Moments later, the 12 jurors filed in, solemn, quiet, each one wearing the weight of what they were about to say. Eliza scanned their faces, trying to read the lines, the clenched jaws, the locked eyes, but they gave away nothing. The judge nodded to the foreperson, a woman in her late 50s with silver hair pulled into a tight bun. She held a folded slip of paper in both hands. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" the judge asked. "We have, Your Honor."
Please read the verdict. The four persons stood, unfolding the paper. In the matter of Officer Trevor Grayson, we, the jury, find the defendant guilty of wrongful arrest and racial profiling. The courtroom didn't erupt, not yet. There was a moment of stunned quiet, a breath held by 100 people, and then the murmurs began. Some gasped, some sighed in relief. A few people clapped before being hushed by the bailiff. Eliza's eyes flicked to Marcus. He didn't move at first, like he couldn't process the words. Then slowly, his shoulders dropped. His lawyer leaned over and whispered something, and Marcus nodded, blinking rapidly. Tears welled up in his eyes, but he didn't let them fall. He just stared forward silent, as if he didn't dare believe it was over. Then she looked at Grayson. The rookie officer sat at the defense table, hands clasped tightly in his lap. His face was pale, his lips pressed into a flat line. For once, he didn't look angry or indignant. He just looked hollow, like a man realizing the consequences of something he'd long pretended wasn't real. The judge banged the gavel once. Court is adjourned. People stood. Reporters swarmed toward the exit to file their stories. Protesters outside began cheering as news trickled out. Photographers flashed cameras toward the front of the courtroom. But Eliza didn't move. She stayed where she was, letting the chaos swirl around her like water around a rock. And then, breaking through the noise, she heard it. "Your Honor!" It was Grayson. He had stood up from his seat and was addressing the judge, voice trembling. I just need to say something." The judge paused. "Officer Grayson, the court is adjourned. This is highly unorthodox." I know, but I have to say it, please." The judge gave a slow nod. "Proceed." Grayson turned toward Marcus, then toward the courtroom. "I thought I was doing my job. I thought I was protecting the community, but I see now I was wrong." His voice cracked. "I didn't see Marcus as a person. I saw a threat. Because of the way he looked. Because of the assumptions I've carried around without realizing it. I acted out of fear, not facts. And that fear had nothing to do with him and everything to do with what I've been taught to believe." The room was still. "I'm sorry," Grayson said, "to Marcus, to his family, to the people watching this trial hoping for something to change. I can't undo what I did, but I see it now. And I'm going to spend every day trying to be better than I was." He sat back down, shaking. No one clapped, no one cheered, but a few heads nodded, slow, tentative. A gesture not of forgiveness, but of acknowledgement. The kind that says, "That's a start." Outside the courthouse, Eliza stepped onto the sidewalk. The cold air hit her like a slap. Dozens of cameras turned toward her immediately, lights blinking, microphones pushed toward her face. She shook her head. No comment. They followed anyway. "Detective Benton, is this a turning point for Spokane? Do you feel vindicated? What's next for Officer Grayson?" She ignored them all, pushing through the crowd toward the alley beside the courthouse, the one she'd used just days earlier, trying to avoid being seen. Behind her, the noise of the press faded. And there, waiting by the corner, as if the moment had been prearranged, stood Marcus Hill. He turned as she approached. "Hey!" Eliza stopped a few feet away. "Hey!" For a second, they just stood there. Two people who had been unwillingly tied together by a moment of injustice and everything that came after. "I didn't think it would end this way," Marcus said. "No one did." He hesitated. "But it did." "Yeah," she said.
It did.
Marcus looked down, then back at her. "Thank you. For believing me, for showing up, for not walking away." Eliza shook her head. "You don't need to thank me." "I do." She didn't argue, just nodded. Then Marcus's expression shifted, uncertain but hopeful. "You think this will change anything?" he asked. Eliza was quiet for a long time. Then, "Not everything, but something." He exhaled. "I'll take something." She smiled, faint but real. "Me too." Later that evening, Eliza sat in her apartment, still in her work clothes, the glow of the news lighting up the room. The TV played highlights from the trial, interviews, clips of Marcus, shots of protest signs. And there again was Grayson's face, grainy footage of his apology, already circulating across the country. The anchors called it a landmark ruling, a watershed moment. But Eliza knew better. This wasn't the end. This wasn't justice fully served. This was one battle, one win, in a war that stretched far beyond courtrooms. And tomorrow, it would begin again. But for tonight, just tonight, she allowed herself to breathe, to believe that maybe, just maybe, the tide was shifting. And that sometimes, doing the right thing wasn't about fixing everything. It was about refusing to stay silent, about standing up even when you're tired, about being the crack in the dam until the whole thing breaks. The morning after the verdict, a thin frost coated the sidewalks of downtown Spokane. The city was quieter than usual, as if everyone was still processing what had just happened. The news vans were still parked outside the courthouse, but fewer reporters loitered now. The cameras had caught the headline they wanted. The story was already transitioning into analysis, reaction, and op-eds. Inside her office at precinct headquarters, Eliza Benton stared out the window. A manila folder sat unopened on her desk. Her next case, a burglary on the South Hill, but her mind wasn't on it.
Instead, she kept thinking about the look on Grayson's face when he apologized, the weight in Marcus's voice when he said thank you, the silence of the courtroom when the word guilty was spoken. Her phone buzzed, a text from her captain. "Need you upstairs. Press conference at 11. You're speaking." Eliza stared at the screen, then at the folder. She didn't respond, just grabbed her coat and headed for the door. The conference room upstairs was packed with media again, the last wave before the story shifted. Captain Ortega stood at the podium, flanked by Sergeant Rivers and two representatives from the mayor's office. Eliza stood off to the side, waiting her turn. "This case has brought important issues to light," Ortega was saying. "It's clear that reforms must go beyond policy. They must become part of our culture, our training, and our daily practice as officers sworn to protect and serve everyone." A few nods from the crowd. Pens scribbled, cameras clicked. "Detective Benton will now speak briefly," Ortega said. Eliza stepped to the podium. The room shifted forward. "I'm not here to give a speech. I'm not here to celebrate. Because this isn't a celebration." She paused. "A man was arrested on his own porch because someone assumed he didn't belong there. That's not new. That's not rare. What's rare is that it was caught, challenged, and corrected." Eliza looked across the sea of faces. What happened to Marcus Hill shouldn't be a lesson we needed in 2025. It should be one we learned decades ago. But here we are. A deep breath. I became a cop to make things better. Not perfect, just better. And every time someone like Marcus is profiled, that mission takes a hit. It makes it harder for people to trust us, harder for us to do our jobs, harder for communities to feel safe. She leaned forward slightly. This case wasn't just about Marcus, or Grayson, or me. It was about every person who's ever been told you don't belong here because of how they look. It's about rebuilding trust, one decision at a time. She stepped back. That's all I have.
There were no questions, just a slow ripple of applause that faded almost as quickly as it started. After the press conference, Eliza walked back to her office. Her phone buzzed again, this time a text from an unknown number. "You don't know me, but I just wanted to say thank you for speaking up, for standing your ground. My son watched the trial every night.
You gave him hope. Renee Hill, Marcus's mom. Eliza stared at the message for a long moment before replying, "Tell him I'm proud of him, and I'm listening." She set the phone down. That evening, Eliza sat on a bench overlooking the river. The city lights shimmered in the water, reflecting a world that felt slightly altered. She didn't come here often anymore. Too many memories. This was where she used to come on her worst days in uniform. After hostile traffic stops, cold shoulders from colleagues, quiet moments of racism disguised as concern. Tonight felt different, not because things were fixed, but because they'd been named. She heard footsteps behind her. Then a familiar voice. "Mind if I sit, Sergeant Rivers?" Eliza nodded, and he dropped onto the bench beside her, groaning a little as he sat. "Old bones," he muttered. "You're not that old." "I'm older than the rookie who got himself convicted," he said. They both chuckled softly. They sat in silence for a while, the wind tugging at the ends of their coats. "You think he meant it?" Rivers asked. "Grayson?" Rivers nodded. Eliza took a moment. "Yeah, I think he did." "Doesn't change what he did, though."
No, she agreed. But maybe it'll change what he does next. Rivers leaned back, arms crossed. I've seen a lot of rookies come and go. Some you forget, others leave a mark. This one, he might be both. Depends on what he does now, Eliza said, whether he hides or shows up. Rivers gave her a sidelong glance. You ever think about quitting? Yeah, all the time. But you don't. She shook her head. Because I still think I can help, even when I'm angry, even when it's hard. Same. They sat in silence again, not out of awkwardness, but mutual understanding. Then Rivers stood. You coming to the training revamp meeting next week? I'll be there. Good. We need you in the room. As he walked away, Eliza remained seated, watching the water flow steadily beneath the bridge, listening to the sounds of a city still turning. That night, in another part of town, Marcus Hill stood on the front porch of his house, same spot where it all began. He looked out at the quiet street, hands in the pockets of his hoodie. The same hoodie from that night, now washed, a little faded. His sister, Tasha, stepped outside beside him. You all right? Yeah, just thinking. She nodded, following his gaze. Feels different out here now. It is, a little. She bumped her shoulder into his. You did good, big bro. He smiled. Tasha reached into her coat and handed him something. A small piece of paper. What's this? Something Mom wanted you to have. Marcus unfolded it. It was a quote, handwritten in neat cursive. Justice is not only about punishment. It's about truth. It's about healing. And it's about not letting the same pain repeat. Unknown. Marcus folded it again, slipping it into his hoodie pocket. He looked out at the street once more. Not perfect, he said, but maybe better. Tasha smiled. I'll take that. They stood there together, the porch light casting a soft glow on the concrete. No flashing lights, no shouting voices, no handcuffs. Just peace. And maybe, finally, a beginning. 1 week later, a light drizzle tapped against the windows of the Spokane Community Justice Center, a newer building on the edge of downtown meant to be a symbol of progress. Inside, the energy was tense but hopeful. The department was hosting its first community accountability forum since the trial. Officers, lawyers, activists, and residents all sat in folding chairs arranged in a wide circle. No podiums, no uniforms, just people. Detective Eliza Benton sat to the side, arms crossed, her badge clipped low to her hip. She didn't want it to define her presence here. Today, she wasn't here as a cop. She was here as a witness, a listener. Across the room, Marcus Hill sat with his mother and sister. He looked more relaxed than he had during the trial, less like a defendant and more like himself, but he still had that quiet guardedness about him, like the echoes of that night were still playing somewhere in the background. Captain Ortega stood in the center of the circle.
This meeting isn't about PR. It's not about clearing our name. It's about listening and figuring out how to do better. He gestured toward a woman in her 30s seated next to Marcus. We'll begin with Simone. She works with the local Equity Alliance and will be moderating. Simone smiled and stood. Thanks, Captain. First things first, thank you all for showing up. That alone says a lot. Today, I want to open with a question we don't ask enough. What does trust look like? Not the kind written into a mission statement, the kind that's earned. She turned to Marcus. Would you be okay sharing a few thoughts? Marcus nodded slowly, standing to address the circle.
When I was cuffed on my own porch, he began, I didn't just feel scared, I felt erased. Like everything I'd done in life, school, work, being a good neighbor, none of it mattered. One look and they saw danger. He looked around. So, when you ask what trust looks like, it looks like being seen, not assumed, not judged, just seen. Silence followed his words, not empty, but full. Next, someone from the back stood. It was Officer Grayson. He hadn't been sure he'd even show up today, but here he was, in plain clothes. No badge, no weapon. I messed up, he said quietly. I've said that a lot, but hearing you speak, Marcus, it hits different. Because I didn't just hurt you, I hurt your family. I hurt trust, and I didn't even know I was doing it. He looked down. That's the part that keeps me up. Simone nodded. That's where change starts, not in knowing you were wrong, but understanding why. A few officers looked uncomfortable. One older man near the door shifted in his chair, arms folded tightly, but no one interrupted. Then, Eliza stood up. She didn't need to say anything, but she wanted to. I've worn this badge for 14 years, and in that time I've seen how easily it can turn into armor. Not just against bullets, against criticism, against reflection. She glanced toward Grayson. Trevor, you're not the first to make that mistake, but you might be one of the first to name it in public. That matters. He gave a small nod. She turned to the group. But let's be clear, accountability isn't a finish line, it's the beginning of a long road. One where you show up even when it's uncomfortable, especially then. Someone clapped, then a few more. Not loud, but genuine. Simone raised a hand. Thank you, Detective Benton, and thank you all of you for sitting with this. We'll keep this space open, once a month. No cameras, just people. Because that's how we build back what's been broken.
Later, as the forum wrapped and people filtered out, Eliza found herself beside Marcus outside the center. The rain had slowed to a mist. You heading home? She asked. He nodded. Eventually. Might just walk for a while first. Eliza smiled. Good choice. Spokane's quiet after a rain. He glanced at her. So, what happens now? To Grayson. He'll face an internal review, she said. He'll probably be suspended. Maybe more. But honestly, that part's out of my hands. Marcus nodded. Do you think he'll change? Eliza thought about it. I think he's starting to, she said. And that's more than I could have said a few weeks ago. They stood there for a beat. Hey, for what it's worth, I think people listened to you during this case. Like, really listened. Eliza met his eyes. Then let's make sure they don't stop. He nodded once, then stepped off the curb and into the streetlight glow. She watched him disappear down the block, hoodie pulled up, hands in his pockets. This time, no one stopped him. Back in her apartment, Eliza sat by her window with a cup of tea. The trial, the verdict, the forum, all of it still echoed in her bones. She turned on the small TV in the corner. A news anchor was summarizing the case. In a rare decision, a Spokane jury delivered a guilty verdict against Officer Trevor Grayson, marking a turning point in conversations about race and accountability in law enforcement. Eliza muted the sound. On her desk sat a stack of files waiting for her. New cases, old pain, but also new chances. She pulled the top folder open, and with a quiet breath, she began again. Because that's what justice looks like. Not a finish line.
Piece by piece. One of the most powerful messages from this story is the danger of unchecked assumptions and the quiet strength it takes to confront them. Whether it's the rookie officer who acted on bias without realizing it, Or the detective who was profiled despite her position. The story reminds us that prejudice isn't always loud or obvious. Often it's woven into habits, instincts, and silence. But acknowledging that truth is the first step toward change. This case shows that accountability is not about revenge. It's about growth, truth, and healing. When Officer Grayson admitted his mistake, it didn't erase the pain, but it opened the door for understanding. That moment teaches us that real strength isn't in denying our flaws, but in facing them. And like Eliza Benton, who keeps showing up despite exhaustion and doubt, we're reminded that change is rarely instant. It's built over time, decision by decision. Whether you're someone with power or someone who's been hurt by it, your voice matters. Justice doesn't begin in courtrooms. It begins in conversations, choices, and the courage to keep going, even when it's uncomfortable. Because change, real change, always starts with someone refusing to stay silent.
If you found this video helpful or thought-provoking, don't forget to give it a thumbs up. It really helps more people discover our content. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss the latest updates from our channel. Thanks for watching. We will see you in the next videos.